Okay, so today we're going to talk about the issue of the Macedonian Name-change Referendum, and perhaps the first thing that we have to do in order to understand that issue is to understand what Macedonia as a word means. Because in fact it has three very separate meanings which are close to each other, but there should be a difference made between them. And at the broader sense, Macedonia is a region which spans 5 countries, so it is mostly the northern part of Greece, all of the Republic of Macedonia, as well as small parts of Bulgaria, Serbia and Albania. The second meaning of Macedonia is the ancient kingdom of Macedonia, which existed between the 9th and 2nd centuries before Christ and was famously ruled by Alexander the Great. And finally we have the Republic of Macedonia, the modern one, which is also called Fyrom in international courts, meaning the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. In fact, there is very little geographical overlap between the ancient kingdom of Macedonia and the current Republic of Macedonia, and their people are distinctly different. The ancient Macedonians were a part of the ancient Greek communities around them. They were a Hellenic people, whereas the modern Macedonians are a Slavic people with a Slavic language, and they are culturally a lot more similar to the Bulgarians and Serbians around them. The main similarities between the two are actually the flag and the name, both of which have been in the center of a decade-long conflict between Greece and modern Macedonia. There isn't a precise point in time when the conflict started. However, it can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th century, when the whole region was being gradually freed from Ottoman rule. Because until that point, the Ottomans had ruled over the whole Balkan region for around 4 or 5 centuries, and therefore the borders between peoples and between states had become a lot less clear. The Second Balkan War was fought between the regional powers, Serbia, Bulgaria and Greece, over the future of Macedonia, and at the same time within the country there were various opinions of what that future should be. Some people thought that Macedonia should be an autonomous state within a Balkan federation. Some wanted it to join the Bulgarian kingdom, and some people even wanted an independent Macedonia as its own sovereign state. It wasn't until the fall of communism and the fall of the Yugoslav Federation that Macedonia saw the opportunity to establish itself as an independent state, and took that opportunity by peacefully claiming their independence in 1991. The subsequent history of the Republic of Macedonia has been very interesting because to some extent they had to re-establish themselves as a nation state. And to do that, they used partly their Macedonian heritage, reclaiming, for example, the ancient Macedonian flag of Alexander the Great's family and using it as their own, which Greece took offense to. And in 1994, Greece actually established an economic embargo on Macedonia in order to coerce them into changing their flag, which worked, and in 1995 Macedonia adopted their new flag. Under the government of VMRO, which is Macedonia's right-wing nationalist party, between 2006 and 2016, Macedonia continued this appropriation of Greek culture, specifically by building many monuments, most notably of Alexander the Great, as well as renovating the center of their capital with buildings which are meant to resemble ancient Greek temples. Cultural appropriation is only one of the 2 main issues that Greece takes with the newly established Macedonian identity. The second issue, according to Greeks, is that the name Macedonia can be used to justify an attempt to annex part of the Greece territory, which is still belonging to the region of Macedonia. This nationalistic approach by the VMRO government has been seen as problematic by some Macedonians as well as Bulgarians, and more crucially by Greeks, who have in turn used their veto power in organizations such as NATO and the European Union, which are ideally the goal of the Macedonian state. The VMRO government has attempted to circumvent this issue by adopting EU and NATO standards in an attempt to integrate Macedonia and eventually have it be accepted just because it fulfills these standards. However, we have seen that this approach hasn't worked for the last decades. And now it's time for the Macedonian public to maybe consider a different approach, the one proposed by the Social Democrat Party. In 2016, a wiretapping scandal connected to the VMRO leadership led to the collapse of the government, and this gave way to new elections and finally a chance for the Social Democrats to retake power. While they didn't win the elections, they had 1% less than VMRO, they were better positioned to make a coalition and finally managed to grab the government and change the direction of the country. Their approach included removing many of the problematic monuments built in Macedonia, as well as re-establishing talks with Greece in order to find a new solution to the name problem. And that is how we arrive today at the Prespa Accord, which has been already signed between the two countries and which is one possible resolution of the problem if it becomes approved by the referendum on the 30th of September. The Prespa Accord can be seen as a compromise solution. It respects Greece's red line that the name of Macedonia be changed to North Macedonia, and that this change is used not only in international treaties but even incorporated in the constitution and used in every occasion, even in everyday conversations. At the same time, it also respects Macedonia's insistence that Macedonian as a people and as a language be recognized. This agreement has received resounding support from the international community and especially European nations, as well as the United States. At the same time, the accord has received a rather cold reaction from Russia, which is understandably unenthusiastic about another Balkan state joining NATO. The reaction within Macedonia has been understandably divided. Most political parties, especially the Social Democrats and their coalition partners, have been supporting the referendum and have urged people to go out and vote for. Surprisingly, this has been the position of the original founders of the VMRO party. The current leadership of the VMRO party have been against the accord and even the referendum itself because they describe it as manipulative. And in fact, the phrasing of the question is rather odd. Are you in favor of European Union and NATO membership by accepting the agreement between the Republic of Greece and the Republic of Macedonia? While the referendum is accepted to be on the treaty itself, it could be understood as a referendum on the membership of Macedonia within these two institutions, which is a very different matter. This isn't just a coincidence, considering that more than 75% of Macedonians want to see their country join NATO and more than 80% of them want to see it join the European Union. It is obvious that the government is somewhat playing on these feelings to make the referendum have a higher chance of success. This could even raise the question of whether or not the referendum in its current form is constitutional. If we accept that the referendum is in fact on the membership of Macedonia in international organizations such as the European Union and NATO, then by definition of the constitution it has to be legally binding. This would mean that more than 50% of the voting population has to vote for the referendum in order for it to succeed. And the final result of a binding referendum is legally binding. On the other hand, currently the referendum is considered to be consultative. This would mean that for the referendum to be considered a success, 50% of the voting population need to vote and the majority of them need to be in favor. So this means that in reality a lot fewer people are needed to be in favor of the referendum for it to succeed. On top of that, it gives the government the final say on the question, which means that even if the referendum doesn't acquire the necessary number of votes, it can still be used to legitimize the treaty. With only 10 days to go, the Constitutional Court of Macedonia has declared that the referendum is constitutional and it will remain consultative. However, this has made some people question whether or not the Constitutional Court is only making this decision under the influence of the public opinion or even under the influence of the government, which raises question about the rule of law in Macedonia. Sadly, not many opinion polls have been conducted on the issue of the referendum. However, those which have been show some very interesting results. Almost all of them put the support of the referendum around 42 to 46% of the total population, and about the same numbers in rejection of the referendum. with around 10 or 12% of the voting population not being sure yet what they're going to vote. What is even more interesting is that the voters who are against the referendum are very split on whether or not they will be voting at all. The argument goes that considering that more or less the same amount of people support and reject the referendum, it would be safer to actually boycott the referendum so that the result will not be official if the 50% census is not reached. However, this would require very good coordination of the voters against, because if even 1/4 of them show up and vote against, the census is very likely to be reached and the majority of voters would have been for the referendum. So far it seems that VMRO has really failed to organize its voters efficiently because the party hasn't taken an official stance on the referendum question. They have simply told their voters to do what they think is right. In the last few days, many of the members of parliament of the VMRO have been coming out on their personal social media to say that they are going to boycott the referendum. On the other hand, some of them, even though it's a small minority, have explicitly said that they will be voting and that it is their duty to participate in this vital referendum. So overall we can see that the opposition has not really been organized and is somewhat confused if they should be voting against or boycotting the referendum in itself. Because of the very even split between no and yes voters, it's difficult to predict which way the referendum will go. However, the lack of good coordination for the opposition could just be enough to translate into a successful referendum. In the event of a successful referendum, there are still a few more steps which are needed before the process can be finalized. Both parliaments need to ratify the treaty, which is going to be somewhat difficult because both the public and the political elites of the countries have been very divided on the issue. In fact, there have been massive protests in both Greece and Macedonia, with tens and, according to some sources, even more than 100,000 people going in the streets of both countries. At the same time, in Macedonia, there needs to be an approval by the president before the treaty can be signed into law. And the president, being a very strong nationalist, has said that he won't do that. His veto power isn't final and can only serve to delay the referendum. However, it's one of the difficulties that the process could face. Once the treaty has been ratified by both parliaments, the membership of Macedonia in NATO should follow very shortly, as there are virtually no obstacles in front of it. However, with the European Union, it's going to be a different story. According to the recent report of the European Commission, Macedonia is still facing some difficulties in key areas, specifically in corruption, the freedom of speech, fight against organized crime, and hate speech. A likely time frame for Macedonia to join the European Union would be around 2025 or even 2030. In the case that the referendum fails, there are two possible scenarios. If the referendum fails because the majority of voters are against, which is much less likely considering that the opposition has mostly been running on a platform of boycotting the referendum and not voting against it, this would put the government in a very difficult position considering that the treaty would be almost impossible to justify afterwards. This is very likely to lead to new elections, and in that case the Social Democrats would have lost a major point in their political platform. On the other hand, the VMRO party has been delegitimized somewhat in the last 2 years because a number of their key members have been implicated in high-profile scandals of corruption and wiretapping. This puts both parties in a very difficult position for the next elections. Not to mention that whoever wins them is going to be taking charge of Macedonia without any clear plan for the future.